Thank you for your attending and watching online. The Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting, Tuesday, February 17th, is now called to order. The first item on the agenda will be a staff report from Jim David, our Legislative Operations Manager.
Good afternoon, Jim David, Legislative Operations Manager for the Council. This morning we received word that Senate Bill 135 has been delayed. This is the third penny for infrastructure bill. It has nothing to do with the bill, but simply it was the workload that the committee had, and so they're going to delay it till next week, probably Thursday, but we'll wait to receive word from the Municipal League on that hearing. The bill was actually passed the Senate a couple weeks ago, 19-14. Last week, House Bill 1167 was overwhelmingly rejected by the House Local Government Committee. This bill would have allowed website postings of legal notices online in lieu of posting them on the official newspaper. Committee concerns included religious prohibitions against internet use, record archives, and concerns for those who are unable to access the internet. We also continue to monitor the two major highway bills, Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1131. Senate Bill 1, which was developed by the Summer Interim Committee, was hog-housed to mirror the governor's proposal, House Bill 1131. The Senate passed the hog-house version 26-8. The bill is now awaiting a hearing in House State Affairs where the governor's original proposal still sits. On a separate subject, the City Street Naming Committee has begun the process to rename Highway 100, which includes the current South Dakota Highway 11 and Powder House Road, to Veterans Parkway. Councilor Rolfing and staff from Council, City Engineering, and Planning are working through the naming process that requires a 2/3 approval from landowners that abut the portion of the street to be renamed. Once this is completed, the naming committee, or the street naming committee, will hold a public hearing, and if approved, it will move on to the City Council for your final decision. Happy to answer any of your questions.
Any questions from the council? Councilor Jameson?
Jim, I just wanted to add that I was in Pierre for House Bill 1167, right?
Yes.
Is that the number?
Yep.
And I just wanted to share with the council, that's the one where we, you can post your legal notices online or print them in a newspaper. And what I heard and learned from that committee was that there's truly two main objections, and that is the archiving of the notices. So, as today they're sent to the Argus Leader, at least for Sioux Falls, and the Argus Leader really acts as a kind of a public record or storage facility, a place that they get printed, put on a shelf, stored forever. And our proposal didn't really have a solution for that. The website, that we host, and maybe they're posted there, but it isn't a third-party archiving service. And so until we overcome that objection, I think we're going to have challenges ever moving that bill any further. The other is, which is interesting for the clerk to hear, is that part of the process as well is the proof of publication. When it is emailed over to the Argus Leader, I know the clerk's office has a lot of procedures that they say, yep, they received it. But as well, once it gets printed, then it kind of becomes proof that it was really published. And without those two things, it's hard for the legislators to be confident that the process has been kind of followed through. Which is one thing that's very interesting, you should all know, is that the state legislature does not publish their minutes or notices in any fashion. So I didn't want to get into the point of what's good for the goose is good for the gander, but I don't think we can win with that argument. But I think we probably need to start down a path of either finding a process of archiving these notices and providing some proof of publication in some fashion, whether it's sworn affidavit or something, but just some minor obstacles. And this bill has been brought forward by Steve Westra on our behalf, really. And he had the Municipal League's behalf as well. There's a lot of other communities struggling out there. we spend about $70,000 to $80,000 publishing these notices, if I understand right. In some cases, we publish things for ordinances that are required, but just day in and day out, that's about what we spend. And so I just wanted to bring the rest of you up to speed on that. There's some major challenges that if we don't start working on today and kind of create our own practices, when we get there next time, we can tell them, here's how we've been doing it, and here's how we overcame your objections last time, and we think we have a solid solution for the future. So,
Any questions for Councilor Staggers?
Yeah, Greg, I guess I had never heard of that argument before as far as archiving. Have you heard of it before? Is this just maybe this year's the first time this has been brought up?
no, it's been there before, and you know, good or bad, it's what they argued as their position and what they would probably want to see done. So, we could argue about the process, but I don't think that would get us anywhere. It's really about answering their questions and finding solutions that meet their requirements. Even though they don't do any of that, but we need to do it better than them, and I think we can. We just need to find a way to do it.
Okay.
Any other questions for Councilor Jameson? No? All right. Thank you, Jim. Next on the agenda would be a report from the Public Services Committee.
Yes, thank you. We met last week and we had 2 items that we discussed, one being the mobile vending. Very informational, a lot of detail in there that I guess I would not have expected. They did ask for feedback from the council, so I encourage you to talk to one of the other counselors that sits on the committee and find out what they're asking. They're wanting to know some hours of operations. Just some guidelines for the downtown area is the only area that we're discussing right now to make sure that we're protecting those businesses that have storefronts right now. They will be bringing potentially an ordinance change within the next probably 60 days-ish, I would say, after we iron out some of those details as well. The second thing we talked about, we had a building permit process we discussed as far as kind of what happens as far as the building permit process. We discussed the roofing permit, siding, what happens, who's liable. It was just an overall good presentation of just the process as a whole. One of the issues that I had brought up, and they are definitely working on and hopefully able to help the industry, is to be able to access having that portal online so that they can access the building permits online and not have to call in and get the information for a building permit and schedule it. You can just see the status based online, and that was there previously, and they are working on getting that up to speed as well. So no changes being made at this point, and nothing coming forward out of that committee until possibly April.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Councilor Erickson? Thank you. Next, we have City Council open discussion. Any items for open discussion?
Go ahead.
Councilor Staggers?
Yes, last Tuesday at the council meeting, we were talking about the contract for the ambulance service here in Sioux Falls. And it's a contract for 5 years, so it's a rather significant issue we're dealing with. But as we were talking about that, all of a sudden, we had the vote take place. In other words, not everybody got to say what they wanted to say. And I would hope that in the future, all council members are allowed to say what they want to say. And I think it's an easy way to solve this issue, and that is, before we ever have a vote on anything, that a statement be made. Are there any other comments that council members would like to make before we vote? And that's it. Very simple to deal with, if we just follow through on it in upcoming meetings.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any Councilor Clagley?
I'd have to go back and look at the video of the meeting, but I do believe, Councilor Staggers, that the mayor did ask for any additional questions, and after a pause, hearing none, then he did ask for the roll call vote, and then it was two votes into that process when you had requested a chance to ask more questions. So whether you had not heard the mayor, but again, I do believe that did take place following that kind of format. But I would
Yeah.
agree that that's the format that should be used.
That should be followed in.
I think it was in this
Of course,
case.
I did listen to it again, and I didn't hear that at all.
Okay.
It was just simply an abrupt, okay, we're going to vote now. And that was it. And then Denise began the vote.
Okay.
Counselor, I'll take that under advisement and speak to leadership about that, and we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Counselor Erickson?
One thing I just wanted to bring up in open discussion, I've been getting, two particular areas have contacted me about the same issue, and related issues, however, two separate people that I don't even know if they're aware of each other having the same issue, and that is of parking in certain strip malls or developments as far as, and I haven't talked to the administration yet, I haven't reached out yet, but something maybe to give a brief about how many parking spaces are required per, take a strip mall that has 4 storefronts in there. One's a restaurant, one's maybe a dentist, one's maybe a whatever. You can name the businesses. And just some of the struggles and frustrations that some of the other businesses are having with parking spaces and having access into their establishment. And I believe they're valid concerns, and I know that there is a standard, but I'd like to know what the standard is and when the last time that was evaluated. So I'll be working with our staff and also the administration to maybe look into that a little bit more, but just wanted council to be aware of something that I was going to be looking into.
Any questions for Counselor Erickson? Counselor Clay?
Not on that issue,
Okay.
but I do have another.
Counselor Erickson, is this something that you would want to bring to a committee or something to take a look at, or?
I think right now I'll just look into it, but I think it's something, if anybody's hearing anything, to let me know. Like I said, I've been contacted on 2 different areas in 2 different districts. And so I'll take a peek at it first and maybe see if we need some sort of presentation to come in front of, I don't know if it's land or public services or where it might be, but just to see if there's something that needs to be looked at, maybe adjusted if it's been some time.
What came to mind to me is we just finished rezoning a property on 41st. And there was questions about parking at that point in time to changing that to a commercial property for business and everything. And some of the neighbors came in, including a strip mall owner, talking about parking. So,
And actually, that gentleman was not one I had the conversations with. It was a totally different place. So just to know what that standard is and, again, when it has been updated in the past.
good idea. Counselor Kiley.
On a different item, I had received a contact, and it was kind of timely because I believe it was Councilor Jameson that brought up the issue of billboards here just last week. That's something that we need to look into, and I did receive a letter regarding a billboard that had gone up in the southeast part of town in an area where there are not presently any billboards. So I did ask that be referred to land use for future discussion. And I do know that we have land uses meeting today, but it will be the land use committee meeting in March when that will be a topic of discussion.
Okay. Any questions for Counselor Kiley? I think that's a great item to bring in. We actually had one of the members of the committee that looked over the new zoning laws come to us multiple times and question those electronic billboards. So I think it's a good idea that we take a look at that. Thank you. If you don't mind, I have one item also. Last weekend, a young man took his own life, and we hear about that all the time here and around the area, that there's people out there who don't feel they have an option. And I just want to say you do. You have an option. We do have a national hotline. It's a National Suicide Preserve Life hotline. If you don't think that you have any options and that there's nothing else that you can do, the only thing I ask is that call this number. There's people out there that do care. And that number is 1-800-273-8255. Thank you. Okay. Move into the presentations. First presentation will be tax increment financing. I believe we'll lead off with Darren Smith and Brent O'Neill.
Good afternoon. Darren Smith, Director of Community Development. I just want to touch briefly on Councilor Erickson, the parking issue, and Councilor Kiley, the billboard issue. I think Mike Cooper will be happy to know those are both in his area, and he, I'm sure, would be happy to come visit with you. I'm also fairly certain both are addressed among many, many, many other things in Shape Places. So not the last time you'll hear about Shape Places, I'm sure, and taking a look at the different components in there and tell it's all the way that everybody wants it. So, but yeah, he'd be happy to do that, I'm sure. Okay, so tax increment financing is our topic today. As you know, we've informed the council in recent weeks that we do have a new TIF application for what would potentially become TIF 19 for an affordable housing project downtown. It will be the first to go through this new formal process that we have in place with an application. We may also have a District TIF 16 that the council approved, I'd say about 2.5 years ago, that could be coming back through the process to be amended. We don't know for certain yet. I think it's likely, but we don't know that yet. So I think that, along with some other projects that I know we've had recent conversations with as well, has kind of triggered the request to come talk again, briefly about tax increment financing. So we're happy to do that. It's one of our favorite topics. And what I'm planning to do today is give a very, very similar presentation to the one that we gave to the Minnehaha County Commission recently. So it is a very simple, in my opinion, straightforward presentation, TIF 101, if you will. But we'd be happy, whether that's today or later, individually or in a small group, to go into as much detail as you want. But I have found that sometimes the more detail we go into, the more complicated it gets. People lose interest fast. So I'm going to try and find a good balance here with this. So what I'm going to start with here, these TIF district projects, how do they come to be? And very simply, on a weekly basis, I would say, we have different developer types, businesses and others walk through our door at the Economic Development Office with ideas for projects. Some of them, they want to talk about TIF. In other cases, they don't. But I just want you to understand pretty much the way all of these work. Every project is different. They're each unique from top to bottom, but they pretty much all start basically the same way. They walk in our door or they call us and they say, hey, we've got what we think is a great idea for a project, or we have a good project concept. We'd like to come talk to you about it. Oftentimes those words are followed by a great idea, but we're having some challenges. We can't make the numbers work, and we think it'd be a great project for the community, so can we come talk? The answer is always yes, and we invite them down, and we have a conversation over a cup of coffee. We learn about their idea, and then it just kind of goes from there. Some projects go away quickly, or at least they get taken care of on their own because we all realize and agree that, look, it's not a good fit for TIF. It's just not TIF eligible. Maybe there's a situation where a project idea just isn't going to generate any increment. And oftentimes the folks that come in, quite frankly, they really don't understand TIF that well. And so we talk about what needs to be present for some of these at a very, very fundamental level. The bar is very low at that point. Those things aren't present. It takes care of itself. But sometimes those elements are there or appear to be, and then we just continue to go through the process. we meet with them again, we have more conversations, we ask for more information, we ask more questions, they ask us questions, and so it goes. We go through the project or the process. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring 4 things up here. So at the earliest levels, or stages I should say, with these conversations and these meetings with these potential projects, these are really the 4 key categories. You know, if we had to summarize this in 4 buckets or 4 key categories, what are those things we look for? What are those things that have to be present for us to support a TIF or recommend support of a TIF or TIF approval to the mayor and city council? Well, these are what those are for us as the process has evolved for us. So starting from left to right, necessity. What that means is we need to see that there's a financial gap. They can't make the project work without some kind of assistance, financial assistance of some kind. 9 times out of 10, that's what it is. It's a financial gap of some kind. Now, in some cases, and I don't think this has been the case yet, but definitely could at some point, is as we're beginning to work more and more on very large economic development projects, there could be a day in the near future, distant future, I don't know, but there definitely could be a day where we may come and request support for a TIF district to be successful in getting a very large economic development project where the necessity category may be judged by not so much a financial gap in the project, the pro forma, the wherewithal, and so forth of the entity bringing it forward. It may be we're competing with another city or cities for a project, and we need to do something big to get that. And so if we don't do that, if whatever that is, and the only way we could do it, let's say hypothetically, is through the use of a TIF district, then we're not going to get the project. So that's the but for. You hear a lot with TIF, but for a TIF, this project would not move forward. Most of the time that's a financial gap. It could also be, though, this other thing I'm talking about where we'd say, look, if we don't do this, this is not going to happen. It won't happen here. Okay, use of the dollars. This is where we look for those. You'll hear us commonly refer to TIF eligible expenses. So we will look for what would the dollars go for in a project. And we always like to look for things that we feel have a public benefit. And I've got a slide in just a few slides. There's only about 10 slides in this whole thing, so I'll go through quickly. But we have a slide devoted to what are those most common TIF eligible expenses that we reimburse for through a project, okay? And things like might be environmental remediation, cleaning up a contaminated site. It might be infrastructure, streets, sewer, water improvements, sidewalks that go along with the project. It may be demolition of blighted properties, grading of a site, maybe tremendous issues with topography at a site that would make it very expensive and difficult to develop. So what exactly will those dollars go for that will be reimbursed to a private project through TIF? And we like to see the public benefit. Then as you move a little further to the right, I suppose you could say that's where it goes from maybe on the left. It's more objective, but still some subjectivity. And as you move further to the right, I suppose it gets a little more subjective in the analysis. Significance and impact. What we like to look for here is somebody coming forward with a TIF project. What is the significance and impact to the community? Why are we talking about taking what we feel is the extraordinary step of approving a TIF district, essentially public assistance by definition for a private project? Why would we do that? And we feel it has to be a project that has significant impact of some kind, whether that's downtown, for the community, has to be significant and have that kind of community impact. Now that means different things to different people. It is subjective. Then finally, situational factors. I suppose these are the X and Y factors in projects. This is kind of the catch-all. What else is out there? And I'll just give you one example. It could be the current condition of the economy. Okay, so right now in Sioux Falls, we're breaking building permit construction records year after year. The market is pretty hot right now. The economy is very strong. So for us, the bar is higher. But why can't some of these private projects move forward on their own in what is a very, very good economy and very good market? Now, when you're in a recession or a depression situation or something to that effect, well, you might be more willing to try and spur development, make good things happen. I hate to use the stimulus term because that carries different connotations for different people, but it's the same concept. You're more willing to see good things happen to spur development and hopefully bring you out of the situation you're in terms of the economy. Then the last thing at the very bottom here, level of TIF supported. So this is another layer of this whole thing. Just very generically, if we determine through a project and working with the county and the private development team that there's going to be $4 million in increment, $4 million in additional property tax revenue that will be generated by the new project, well, that doesn't necessarily mean if we approve a TIF district for that project that they're going to get all $4 million. Doesn't mean all $4 million will be reimbursed to the project. We determine what is the appropriate amount, and it gets tied back directly to those first two things. What is the need? If they're telling us their financial gap is $2 million, well, then it's very unlikely we're going to support $4 million in reimbursables for that project because they've told us they don't need that much. Secondly, what are the use of those dollars? Again, it goes back to those TIF eligible expenses, those items with public benefit on some level. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of different variations with this, but I just say this. You will see projects. You can look at all the TIF projects that have been approved on the city's website, and as you look through those and those TIF plans, it always identifies in those plans the estimated increment that should be generated by the project, the amount of TIF eligible expenses, and then also the amount that was actually approved for that TIF district. You will see some projects that generate this much increment, but only have this much in TIF eligible expenses. And then conversely, you'll see some projects that have this much in TIF eligible expenses. Unfortunately, they only generate this much in increment, okay? So if that makes sense. So this is how we judge the projects as we keep taking steps forward. So this is a graphic that I know it probably looks kind of confusing on the surface. It's actually pretty straightforward. And what I would say is if you just start in the upper left-hand corner, just what is tax increment finance district? How exactly does it work? Well, at a very, very high level, this is it. This is how it works. So in the upper left-hand corner with that box, TIF district boundary is created and the base assessed value is established. That's where we talk to the county, and the county, the Office of Equalization says after a TIF has been approved, or at the time the TIF is approved really, this is the base assessed value of that property. So let's say hypothetically, you have a property with not much on it, and that's why a TIF is proposed to make a project happen. Let's say the assessed value today of a property is $100,000. It's $100,000 today. And let's say it generates $10,000 in property tax revenue, okay, for the school district, city, county. Okay, that $100,000 assessed value pre-project is what's locked in. So after the TIF is approved and that project happens, and let's say it adds, you know, the new assessed value of the new project, whatever it is now $1 million. Okay, and that's a very low number. But let's just say it's $1 million for easy math. Now that's how we determine what's the increment. So now you've taken a property assessed at $100,000 before the TIF approved project. After the TIF is approved, the project happens. Now the assessed value essentially is $1 million, okay? That $900,000 in between, as far as the amount of increment generated, that's the increment, if that makes sense. So the dollars that were going to the school district and the county and the city before the TIF was approved, all of those dollars still go to the city, the county, and the school district. Whatever was going to the city, county, and school district for property tax revenue before the TIF continues to go. It's the additional dollars, that increment, that is captured, and you see that on here, is captured in the TIF fund. It's earmarked, it's identified, it's captured in the TIF fund, and then it is reimbursed to the private project for those expenses, those TIF eligible expenses that we agreed upon when the TIF was approved, okay? So again, you can kind of go through the 4 or 5 boxes we have here, but at the end of the day, when you approve one of these TIF districts, you have the project happen. Let's say it's a maximum TIF of 20 years for X amount of dollars. After the 20 years is up and all of those expenses have been reimbursed, that the city agreed to reimburse through that TIF fund, when that takes place, the TIF district is dissolved. Now, whatever that additional amount of property tax revenue generated is, that all now goes to the school district, the city, and the county. That's the windfall that is experienced from these projects after a TIF district is dissolved because it was successful. And you're going to see a term in just a moment referred to as deferred benefit. That's what I refer to as the deferred benefit of a TIF district. So you have to wait for that benefit, but it does come. Okay, here's just a couple common terms or questions that we get repeatedly with some of these. How much does a TIF, quote, take from taxing entities? Well, the short answer is nothing. Again, I said that just a moment ago. Whatever the city, county, school district get today on a piece of property before a TIF district, those entities continue to get that, every penny of that, after the TIF district is approved, okay? What they don't get immediately is the increment from the project, those additional property tax dollars that are being generated because you took something assessed at $100,000 and you took it to $5 million, okay? That's the deferred benefit you get when the TIF district expires. Developer funded TIF, this is another one. There's really 2 ways to do these TIF districts and to fund them. There's publicly funded, which is where, let's just take the city as an example. The city would bond or borrow money to invest in a project or make a project happen. This is probably much more common in other communities than it is here. But the city would provide dollars, and then we would approve a TIF district to reimburse ourselves for those expenses. The other way to do it is developer-funded TIF, and this is the way we almost always do them. I can speak to the 9 that we've brought forward and approved in the last 4.5 years that I've been in this position, and they've all been developer-funded. What that means is the private developer, the private entity, the private business, whoever's bringing the project forward, they provide all the funds for the project. They front all of those, whether it's through their own cash, investors, oftentimes it's taking out loans, like everybody else for these projects. They fund the projects 100%, and then they get reimbursed through the TIF district when they start paying their property taxes. That's how it works, and that goes back to that slide we just showed. The reason I want to stress this is the reason we don't do publicly bonded TIFs or publicly funded TIFs, or we don't like to, is because then, of course, the city and the taxpayers are borrowing to invest in, what's a private project. The city and taxpayers take all the risk in that. The project has to be successful. The private entity has to pay the property taxes for us to get our money back. Developer-funded TIF, all of the risk is with the private project. It's their dollars. They only get reimbursed through the TIF district. We hear time and again, people think that I'm going to take the Williams pipeline site TIF district, or also commonly referred to as the Costco TIF. I can't tell you, I heard at least 4 or 5 times after that, I can't believe the city wrote Costco a check for $4.9 million. And I just tell them, we didn't. That's not what we do. All those dollars for the Costco project, as well as the apartments, over 400 apartments were also built on that site as part of the TIF district. Those are all private dollars, and they get reimbursed through the TIF district when they start paying property taxes. That's how it works. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, some of those, quote, TIF eligible expenses we look for, those things with public benefit, that's what we're reimbursing for, not materials in a building or other things that people may think. We went back and looked at the 9 TIF districts, TIF 10 through TIF 18, that we've approved in the last 4.5 years, and we just literally went through and pulled out what are the most common expenses time and time again. These were the 3 most common by far, along with some sub-bullets under each. Cleaning up the environment. This was in, boy, I think 6 or 7, I think 7, at least 7 of the 9. There was some kind of environmental remediation or cleanup that took place. Next, site preparation and blight removal. You're going to find this, I believe, in all 9. All 9 had site preparation and blight removal, demolition of something on the site, rundown property, or something to that effect, grading because of challenges on the site excavation. Some of that could be associated with environmental issues as well. Third, public infrastructure. Streets, sewer, water, utilities, other public improvements. Again, I have to go back and look at all 9. You probably go 9 for 9 with this one too, although I'd have to go back and look again to say for certain. But there's usually a component of some kind in each of these projects. Streets, sewer and water, improving the utilities. But where we see public benefit is not only because they're necessary for that project, but oftentimes they improve the utilities and the infrastructure in that area for the next project and the next one and the next one in that area. Sometimes that's the case. Okay, we wanted to put this together to provide, again, a perspective, put things in proper context. The reality is we have not approved a TIF district in 26, I think going on 27 months. It's been over 2 years since we've approved a TIF district. But there was a period where we approved 9 in 27 months, okay? It's just cyclical, really, is what it amounts to. But at that time, there were some folks I know that were, wow, we're really doing a lot of these TIF districts. Are we getting carried away? That's why we're breaking all these construction records. That's what's driving the economy. Well, if you look at the numbers, clearly that's not the case. From the beginning of 2010 to the end of 2014, that's a 5-year period. The total building permit value citywide of all projects was $2.35 billion. That's just the building permit value. That's not the total value of all projects because that doesn't include the land, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and other things, okay? Total building permit value of the TIF projects that we approved, those 9 TIF projects, total building permit value was approximately $140 million. The real value of all those projects, when you factor in land, FF&E, again, those things that are not captured in a building permit or its value, was over $200 million. Over $200 million associated with those 9 TIF district projects. Very bottom bullet point, the actual amount of TIF that we estimate will likely be allocated for those projects to reimburse them for expenses, we are estimating will be about $23 million. So when you compare that to the $210 million in total project investment, it's about 10 or 11%. That's what's actually reimbursed to those projects. So when you compare $23 million in reimbursables to probably what's in excess of $2.5 billion in development activity at the same time, very, very little of the development activity was supported or incentivized with TIF. Now let's take it a step further and see how does Sioux Falls compare to others that we would look to compare ourselves to for different reasons. So Sioux Falls, this is the current estimate on population that was just recently announced, 169,800. We've approved 18 TIF districts. The last was in December of 2012. So as I said, it's been over 2 years. 18 TIF districts. Rapid City, by contrast, is less than half our size now. They've approved 74 TIF districts. So clearly they're using it in a different way than we are. Omaha, okay, they're somewhat significantly larger than ours, but we wanted to throw one of these in too. 309 TIF districts compared to our 18. And finally, Mitchell, which is about 1/10 of our size. Mitchell has actually approved more TIF districts in the city of Sioux Falls. The reason we show this, of course, is because we've told people repeatedly, we feel like we have been very conservative in our use of TIF. We have not gotten carried away with the use of TIF, and now it's been more than 2 years since we've approved one. Okay, the last few slides here, I just wanted to touch on the fact that As most of you know, if not all of you, we did put a TIF ordinance in place. That was actually late 2013. So in a recent email exchange, I know there was a reference made to changes, recent changes. And one of the comments from one of the new council members is, hey, I'd like to hear about these changes. And it really dawned upon me at that time that we do have these 2 new council members in the last year, and I don't know for sure that we've talked about the TIF ordinance and the changes that we put in place. So again, there was a lot of feedback and community conversation at the time when we were approving those 9 TIF districts. And so we wanted to see if there's a way we could put a formal structure of some kind in place. The truth is, until the ordinance went in, we had no formal structure for TIF in Sioux Falls, no formal application. It was very, very informal. So what did we do to try and build something better? We took almost a year and we did things like we had an open working session with City Council. That was back in January 2012. We had individual meetings with City Council members. We had meetings with Planning Commission members. We met with the school district, the finance officer. We met with county commissioners from Minnehaha County. We met with a number of people in the development community, those who have utilized TIF and others who had talked to us but maybe never utilized it. We met with a number of different people, and what we came up with was the following changes. An ordinance, very, very brief ordinance that came forward, basically said this: it will provide advance notice to elected officials. So for one, we now have a formal application in place that's pretty straightforward. And when we get an application, we will communicate in a memo immediately to the City Council that we have this. We will ensure that we have material on TIF in Sioux Falls available. So we have a dedicated web page now on the city's website, siouxfalls.org. If you go in, search tax increment financing, you'll pull up the web page. It's got all the TIF districts that have been approved, the plans, the boundaries, everything you'd want to know and more. It also provides additional opportunities for review and public input. So before we had 1 planning commission meeting and 1 city council meeting. And I think the complaint there from planning commission was, you know, hey, we don't know much about these until it's on our agenda, and then we got to vote right away. And so we heard that and thought, yeah, that's fair. So now we have 2 planning commission meetings where we go and it's a non-action item. We brief them, answer their questions, and then we come back a month later and ask them to take action. With the city council, these are approved now by ordinance, which was not the case before. And so now that requires 2 city council meetings. They may be back-to-back meetings. They may have a week in between. It just depends on what the schedule is at the time. So yeah, as I said earlier, we have a standard application. Here's some of the basics that are asked for up front: project summary, financial projections, timelines for completion, ownership of project, and then of course we learn much, much more as we go through the process of meeting with them. The application is just the beginning. Some costs associated with it: there's an application fee of $2,500. We now have a payment disbursement fee of $250, because again, when these people pay their property taxes twice a year, and TIF payments are then made to reimburse the private entities for those eligible expenses we agreed to twice a year. We have to administer that. The finance department administers that, keeps track of all that, makes sure it's accurate, it's timely. And so there's staff time associated with that, and there's a cost. And these are for reimbursing private projects and private entities with public dollars. So there's a fee. The other reason we did that is because as these started getting a little more complicated, we started having some projects ask us to reimburse multiple entities. So years ago, it was pretty straightforward. You know, twice a year, you'd cut a check to a bank or 1 entity. And some of these started getting where they were asking us to cut checks in 2 and 3 different ways. And we realized, hey, they've got to have some skin in the game to do this. And then finally, we now have a structure in place to recover external costs for legal and financial reviews that we go through with these attorneys and others. Before, we would incur those costs on behalf of the project to make a good recommendation and get approval, and then we would be reimbursed over time through the TIF. So again, we were carrying these expenses for what was a private project and getting reimbursed later. So now what we've done is we've said, look, these are costs that need to be incurred when you apply. We visit with them about them, they understand them, they agree to them. But then when we incur those costs, we ask to be reimbursed in a timely manner, usually 30 to 60 days. Because again, these are all being done to support a private project. So taxpayers should not have to carry those costs and wait to be reimbursed. Okay, that's the ordinance that went in, and so questions?
Councilor Urfenbach?
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate it. I was involved with the council when we passed this new ordinance in October of 2013. I just want to talk a little bit about what the ordinance says in terms of what the expectations are, how a TIF application works now under the new system.
Yeah.
And I realized before it was informal, but you know, TIFs did get through and they were approved, and it functioned. It was kind of shocking sometimes as an elected official, though, to have them come and then you present it and you go, okay, vote now.
Right.
It was a little overwhelming that way. I understand that. The ordinance now says that the applications requesting the establishment of the TIF shall be completed, shall being the key word there, shall be completed and submitted to your staff, community development.
Yep.
And then later on in the ordinance it says evaluation, part of the community development department's job is to evaluate each application under this subchapter and provide a recommendation to the planning commission and city council for consideration.
Correct.
Also shall
Yes.
be responsible for.
Yes.
My question is, you say that it's cyclical, that there's just nothing going on right now for TIFs and those kinds of things, and I don't think that's true. I know that you've had conversations with folks who are interested in having TIFs, but they've been discouraged from even applying, even though the ordinance says shall apply and that you shall make a recommendation. Can you talk about, it really isn't cyclical, it really is depending on what you and your staff decide for these folks?
Yeah, great question. And I absolutely would not use the word discourage. We don't tell anyone what they can or can't do. We don't discourage anything. What we do, and you have to understand, this has been happening since I can just go back to the time I started in 4.5 years. It's really not different than the way it's always been taking place. Again, somebody walks in the door with an idea and they think they need help, or they've determined they need help of some kind. And it starts with a conversation and them telling us about their project. Some are nothing more than an idea or a concept. Some are much more advanced. They've been working for some time. It's obvious. They have some detail. Most are somewhere in between, but most are probably closer to the idea concept than advanced. So we have a conversation, we talk about it, and certainly we're offering our opinion as we go through, and the reason is because they always ask for it. What they say consistently, every project, is, hey, before we start investing real money, we start spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on design work, market analysis, those things, we want to know if we're going to get a TIF. And we tell them, well, we can't possibly tell you that. Once we're comfortable with what our recommendation would be, we can share that with you, and then it can move forward if that's what you'd like. But you have to understand, that's what they always want. They want an assurance of some kind before they keep taking steps. And so the best we can do is tell them at some point, whether it's when they want to know or when we feel it's time to tell them, hey, we're not learning anything new here. That's when we would say, this is not something, based on what we know, this is not something that we would likely support for TIF.
If I could continue, Mr. Chair. So talk then, and we've always been really proud of how conservative we are, and we compare ourselves to some communities in South Dakota alone that have gone a little crazy with TIFs. And Sioux Falls is really proud of that fact that we haven't, that we've been very careful with how we've done TIFs. Are we to the point where we're too conservative? If we're not even doing the number of TIFs that a smaller community like Mitchell is doing, are we too conservative, and are there things being left on the table because you and your staff have said, we wouldn't support that?
Well, it's almost an impossible question for me to answer for you. Personally, No, I don't think so, because again, please remember, 3 years ago, I was here explaining why we're doing so many. And there were a lot of people who felt we were doing too many at the time. And now it's that we're not doing enough. And so maybe the fact that we've had both of those conversations in the last 4 or 5 years means we are doing it well. No, my short answer would be no, I don't believe so. Again, what we try to do is these are not emotional decisions. We look at what's the need. Is there a financial need for public assistance to support this and make it a reality? Then what exactly are those expenses going to be that the public will share in, so to speak? What is the significance of the impact to the community? We go through that, and it's not a perfect formula like a math formula where you put numbers in and it tells you, what you need to do. It's not that. But it's a good mix of objectivity and subjectivity, and all we can really do is tell them what we're willing to support and come forward and stand at this podium and answer your questions and the public's and defend.
So you and I have had long conversations about TIFs, and we know that from an economic development standpoint in the state of South Dakota, this is the one option we have as sort of the carrot, sort of that we can help you with. Can you tell me how many potential projects in the last, because you said 26 months since we've approved one, how many potential projects have you said, don't apply?
Oh boy, I mean, you just have no idea how many projects, potential projects walk in the door on a regular basis. I couldn't begin to put a number on it immediately. I mean, it's a regular part of what we do on a weekly basis, and at some point in time, almost everybody brings up TIF because they heard somebody got a TIF, or they've been told it's easy to get a TIF, or when you can't make a project work, this is what you do. You come to the city and you get a TIF. So it's a lot, but a lot of them fall by the wayside early. And I think probably with mutual understanding, when we explain how TIF works, how we use it, they go away for their own reasons. They may take place on their own, but not with TIF. I also should say with those other cities, in fairness to them, you can make an argument that it's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison, because the truth is how Rapid City utilizes TIF, for example, and this is probably true in Omaha. I don't understand that maybe as well as Rapid City or what we do, or even Mitchell. Every city, even those in South Dakota governed by the same or similar state laws, are structured differently as far as how they use their second penny, for example. And they may choose to make up for doing different things with their second penny through TIF. Maybe TIF, they use TIF heavily to fund their infrastructure, to support private projects and improve the infrastructure from a public perspective. So, but no, I don't believe we become too conservative. Right now the economy is very strong, the market is strong, but if we see a great project for the community that has a need, we'll absolutely bring it forward. And I've said that to the county commission. I said it again a couple weeks ago. We all know how they feel right now about the use of TIF districts, and we've been trying to communicate with them and educate them on how we use it. But I've told them, hey, we're not going to hesitate. If there's a great project to move the community forward in some way, we're going to bring it forward, and we'll make the case for it. And, we think it'll do okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Jameson.
Thank you, Darren. First off, the TIF 101 efforts, thank you for trying that. It's not an easy task. I've tried it. Everybody kind of gets glossed over a little bit. Thanks for trying. I think some of us probably need a little more time spent
Absolutely.
Some of that. Yeah. But a couple things that have started my blood boiling since I've been sitting here listening to your answers to Councilor Urbanbach. One of them is just the transparency in this whole process.
Sure.
The idea that you didn't know, you don't have any idea of how many people have come to you and talked about TIFs. We don't have an idea either.
Yeah.
You alone
Yep.
and your staff are the gatekeepers of this process, the biggest, sharpest tool that we have in the toolbox. And I find that a problem, and you brought it up several times that your thought and decision-making process is very subjective, very. You have weekly conversations with people who are asking and wondering about these TIFs. And it is concerning that over 26 or the last 27 months that no TIFs have been approved. I've got several questions here, but first off, I want to ask you, do you think that you've stopped the momentum that has happened with these use of TIFs?
No. You know, the best answer I could give is when I said cyclical earlier, it's just like the economy. It ebbs and flows. I mean, these projects, to some extent, the facts and the details associated with the projects determine their own outcome. When you take it through that four-step process that we talked about earlier, they really, at the end of, when that's all said and done, there's usually general consensus on the strength or lack thereof of the viability of a TIF request or the need for TIF. There really is.
Okay, well, let me move on. Are you familiar with Senate Bill 102 that was proposed recently?
Yes.
In essence, the counties were looking for a way to have more control over the process and determine whether or not they could be a part or not a part of the TIF if they're not the ones who initiate it.
Yep.
I brought this up before, and I'm just throwing it out as a potential option, but the transparency in this process is troubling for me, and I know you went through the process of updating and make a formal process for a better outcome. I know that. I know that, and a lot of us participated in that discussion, but I still feel as though we're missing something. And as I proposed before, and I'll say it again today, that I think there should be a committee developed in the process that has 2 council members on it, 2 county commissioners on it, 2 school board members on it, you and your staff, and that committee sits through and listens to the proposal from any applicant who's willing to step up to the plate, essentially, and have a formal process reviewed, and let that committee recommend to the group whether we should approve it or not. And it's a lot, I think it's a lot like what could happen in zoning. You know, if you guys say, no, we don't like this process, we don't like this TIF, we don't recommend approval, the applicant still has a chance to come back and plead his case to this body, just like in a zoning case where somebody's denied through planning, they can appeal it back through us. I think the process just needs a little work, and I'm really concerned about the drought for 26 or 27 months. I don't think it's a good sign. Yes, we've got a great economy.
Yeah.
God bless Sioux Falls. But
Yeah.
I think we're missing opportunities. Certainly, we don't know for sure if we have or haven't because we just don't have access to the process. So I'm asking for a further discussion about the creation of a TIF committee or some other mechanism to provide better transparency in this whole process. I'd sure encourage a working relationship with you to maybe get that done, and as well as other counselors' feedback.
Well, if I can, you know, certainly we'd be willing to have those conversations, you know, some of which we had before. I would just say that there's a few things. First of all, you know, I really think people always have had the ability. You know, with an application now, if somebody makes formal application, that's something we didn't have before, that would come forward. If we said, look, we're not going to support this, and they said, well, we're going to make application anyway, you know, we would figure out how to bring that forward. That's never happened. So I can't tell you exactly how, but there's always got to be a first time, and that would be the first time. Prior to the ordinance and the application, again, I feel like people always did have the ability. Anybody can approach 2 council members and have them sign in an agenda item form and bring it. And in some respects, I think it's similar in some ways to the planning process and not similar in others. It's not a perfect analogy. But if you talk to planning staff about how many projects they talk to that don't actually come forward or come to fruition, or do a rezone, or, you know, in the old days of conditional use permits, I think you hear a similar story. They have lots of conversations on a regular basis, and some things just go away on their own. And then some things do come forward. And every great once in a while, they get one that they don't recommend support for. So I know that there's conversations right now around some projects. And what I'd say is I'd be happy to visit with each of you individually about those. I think you're hearing a lot of things. I think there's always 2 and 3 sides to every story. And I'd certainly like to give you the other sides, because I think there are some things that are not being shared. Finally, I would say, again, we got to be really careful with what we put in place, any unintended consequences. Is the process truly broken to trigger all of this? Because I can tell you with the larger economic development projects we work on with the Development Foundation, I even had some concerns with the ordinance process we put in place that with some of those, I don't know exactly how that would work with some of those projects when we're working with the state and the Development Foundation and others on you know, what they look for oftentimes in an offer is support of TIF. And the feeling that if we tell them the staff is going to support it and we feel it has a very good case and we'll go to the mat for it, well, they have a strong assurance then that they can look at Sioux Falls. I just, you know, if there's a big committee with lots of different entities and different interests in it, I just hate to create a bureaucratic or highly politicized process that would harm our efforts. So I am just thinking out loud right now, to be very honest with you, but those were some concerns I had when we were putting the ordinance in place. So,
Councilor Staggers?
Excuse me. Darren, in your presentation, you mentioned that you notify the council. When does that take place?
yeah, well, now what we do is the first communication is a memo that goes out at the time of the application. So when we receive the application, we put, you know, as many details as we know at that time together, you know, as quickly as possible, and then we send a memo to council and say, you know, we are formally notifying you of an application of a TIF. Here's what we know. Obviously, much more to come as we go through the process. So that's the first communication, and then we go through the process.
Okay, then, since the last TIF was approved, you said that was what, 26 months?
Approximately. Yeah, December of 2012.
Am I to understand then there have never been any formal applications since then?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Offenbach.
And Councilor Staggers, that's exactly leading into the point that we're talking about, is this idea that there are folks that do want and have presented to the staff TIF options, and the ordinance says that they shall make application and that the staff shall make a recommendation to the planning and zoning and then to the city council. My concern then, and I talked with Councilor Jameson briefly before this about his committee idea. I'm not sure I'm sold on that either. I don't know if it's the great thing. But I do think that if a developer or a person who is seeking a TIF and they've got their act together to a certain extent, should be applying, because the ordinance says they shall apply. And then inherent in that process is the appeal process. Because if you take that application and you say, this really isn't a great application, but now the ordinance says we have to take it to planning. We make our recommendation, we tell planning, vote no. And the planning, maybe they do vote no, maybe they don't, but it still has to go to city council with that recommendation, either up or down, and city council still gets to review that application. That's the concern that I'm hearing from my colleagues at this point, is that there haven't been any applications since December of 2012. But we know, as you alluded to now, we know for a fact that there are people who it has been suggested to them that this is something that staff would not support, and therefore they feel like they really should not apply, and they did not apply. And so that's where the concern is. They don't have the appeal process because they have not been allowed to even make the application. And so I think that's For me, that's the foundation of the conversation we're having here.
I just can't stress enough, though, and again, we'll keep talking about this. The irony in all of this is that we've taken a very development and business-friendly approach. And we talked about this during the ordinance. In fact, I remember saying more than once, we're going to put an application in place so there's a formal process. But you can quote me, I said, now that doesn't mean no more conversation over a cup of coffee. That doesn't mean we're going to say, hey, before we'll talk to you, cut a check for $2,500. And that's not really where, I think we probably need to move a little more in that direction, frankly, especially in light of some of these recent conversations. I think we do. You know, I don't think at the end of the day, even some of those that maybe they think they're advocating for that, I don't think that they're going to be happy with that process ultimately. I have to be honest with you. We've had a very development/business-friendly process where we've tried to help them with some of the challenges that we feel they're going to have to qualify for TIF or to get the council's support or the planning commission support before they have to write that check, before they have to provide a ton of stuff, and before they have to spend money. And the most recent conversation we had with one, that was point blank what was said to us. We're going to start spending some serious money. And so we want to know if we're going to get a TIF before we do that. And that's not uncommon for them to say. So, I mean, we try to help them as long and as much as we can for their own benefit, frankly.
Right, and I'm hearing from folks who are saying, you know, there shouldn't be an application fee at all, and I don't agree with that, because it does cost our staff, it costs the city money for you to do the research, for you to be involved with this conversation. I don't think we take away the fees or any of that, but I think that if you want a TIF, if you're a developer and you want to be a part of this process, then you right away have to put it on paper, put it in writing, and cut us a check. I just wonder if that's where we're headed.
We might be.
So that it isn't, I mean, we're sitting here, you know, because we feel as a council like you've, you know, been hiding things and telling people no and all of this. That's not it. You're just trying to do your job. Maybe we just need to say, you know what, developers, all right, here's where we're at. You got to have skin in the game or we're not talking at all.
Yes.
I don't know.
I agree. And I don't like that either, because I can assure you that's not the case. And to me, it feels a little bit like mom saying no, let's go see what dad says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Councilor Kiley.
Darren, could you go to your last slide?
Yeah.
I have a few questions, then I'm going to come back to this, what is probably the crux of this whole situation here. With the TIF costs, the application fee, that's pretty explanatory, self-explanatory, $2,500. Now, the payment disbursement fee of $250, that's a fee that would be enacted once the TIF's actually been authorized through City Council. So that's kind of at the end of it. My question is, the last bullet point, the structure to recover external costs for legal, is that something that still is occurring up front? Before it's even, the application even reaches us?
No. Oh, yes. That would be, so when there's an application that's put in, again, the amount of information that we have about that project is probably this much of what ultimately we'll need to make a good, solid recommendation and determination. So at that point, we start working through it. And if it continues to advance, yes, we have attorneys and external attorneys that are involved that specialize in TIF, and they help us build the TIF plan that you've seen that's required to come to you. It's a several-page document with the TIF plan, the expenses. We establish the TIF district boundaries. You know, there's a number of other things that maybe Brent could speak to as well or in more detail. But yes, there are expenses involved with that, and most of them are legal.
So the $2,500, that's up front, and that's established. So then the unknown is what these external costs are going to cost me once I've put in the application.
Yes.
From that point until the time the City Council authorizes it.
Yes.
Do you have any idea, based on last 4.5 years, what those external costs have been per project?
I'm gonna go ahead and say in the neighborhood of, on average, I'd say 5,000 to 10,000.
Okay, so then they could have upwards to $12,500 invested in this before it even goes to City Council.
Correct.
And that's if indeed the application has been submitted.
Yep.
And I understand that we've gone 26 months and we haven't had any applications actually formally submitted to you. And if you have had very frank conversations with the developers that you may not support this project, I understand why they might hesitate going into that investment, presenting it, going to the application point. Yep. But I do agree with some of the discussion that's taking place here, that it seems important that we get to that point in the process so that it can proceed, because and I don't know that I necessarily agree with Councilor Jameson that we have to establish yet another committee, because I do believe it's already going before Planning Commission, two meetings, City Council 2 meetings. So I'm not certain that we would need to set up yet another committee in front of that, because it seems like we would have ample opportunity, but it needs to be clear to the developers that they do have that opportunity. And it's not even, and I know, again, Councilor Urbanbach had mentioned an appeal process. Technically, it's not an appeal process.
Right.
Because you're not in a position to say yes or no. We are.
Right. Correct.
So it would go forward to planning. They would come forward to us with a recommendation. Yeah. And then we would obviously listen to what your input is and what the Planning Commission had to say. And we'd make our decisions based on the facts available to us. Yes. But I do agree that we need to get to that point. So what Councilor Urbanbach was saying, just changed your name there. You're welcome. But, I do. Maybe that's just part of the game, that we start this process, and if you've done your homework and you feel strongly that this is eligible for TIF, then this is the process, and this guarantees that we're going to hear it at this level. And they won't have the impression that things have been shut off somewhere before getting to us.
I don't disagree with that. Let me say one thing to help also put this in perspective. I think it's really important is, and I apologize if I sound a little cranky or crabby. I'm sorry. I'm trying not, but the reason we went forward with the ordinance is 2.5 years ago is because there was this widespread feeling that we were getting carried away and doing too many. But before we did that, so before the 9 and 27 months, the City of Sioux Falls had approved 9 in 20 years. And so if you do the math, that's about 1 every other year, maybe every 27 to 30 months, give or take. So the truth is, that 9 in 27 months was an anomaly, and I would say the 0 in the last 26 or 27 months is probably just a cyclical anomaly. Those averages over the last 5 years are about what we saw as a city the previous 20. Before I was here, before Brent was heavily involved with them. So I'd just say again, when you kind of take a step back and look, sometimes it looks a certain way right in front of you or in the current. But the reality is, I think it's actually par for the course going back to 1989 when the city did the first TIF, to be honest with you.
No, and I understand that, and I do not for a second believe you've been cranky or crabby in your presentation here. So I think you've done a good job of at least attempting to answer our questions, and I thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I think going off of what, I share a lot of the same concerns, and going off of what Councilor Jameson said about the committee, I think the intent, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the intent is more to be able to see the conversations that disappear, because oftentimes the buck does stop in community development, and to have this committee, the conversations would then come to county, school, city, not to create more work, but I think maybe that was the intent, and so if we can solve that in other ways, that's great. I appreciate community development department vetting the projects and having those conversations, because oftentimes they do take place over a cup of coffee, but oftentimes they don't take place over a cup of coffee, and people come with everything, and they have not just thought about investing, I'm going to make the project up, outlet mall. They've looked at this and they've thought about it, and they've got a lot on the line as well, that they're not just saying, well, let's throw away $40 million because I can't. They're not going to do that. These people are smart business people that they want to make sure that this is successful and successful for the community as well, and everybody benefits. So what I find troubling is not hearing about the ones that kind of disappear, so to speak. I would really like to see maybe a change. I don't know if it's in the ordinance or what it is, but this shall, not just the application, but we shall see, keep a spreadsheet, keep a document and send it to the city council on a quarterly basis or whatever it might be, but to be able to have that information of why something is, not today, this isn't good for our community, when somebody might have come 6 months ago and asked for the exact same thing, and we're still saying no, but let's compare so we can say, you know what, Project A was here and we said no and this is why, and we can compare our notes, because right now we have nothing to compare. It's just, not today. So I do appreciate your department, who are the experts in much of this, vetting the projects. But my concern is so many that we're not seeing, to be able to just have a seat at the table and be a participant in the conversation, so to speak.
Do me a favor. Can I ask one favor? Can we have a meeting with each of you? I don't care if it's individually. If we can meet with each of you on the TIF process and help you understand exactly how it works from start to finish, I still think it's greatly misunderstood how the process unfolds. It really is. And when that's done, if there's still a desire to go further or do more, we'll be happy to engage in that.
Councilor Offenbach? Are you done? Okay. Your question was answered? Councilor Staggers?
Yeah. Well, Darren, I think the thing is that we are very much aware of how this operates, and we're concerned about it. For example, can you maybe explain to us, in recent requests for TIFs, what's the major reason you've given to these people who have not applied yet, but they've been inquiring and giving you lots of information? Why were they rejected?
Well, probably for a number of reasons. I'd be happy to do that. But again, you got to understand, even going back to Councilor Erickson's request, we would have to do, please understand, when these folks come in, they don't want the whole world to know what they're doing because they have competition. So when they're moving forward with a project of some kind, they don't want the whole world to know what they're doing, all the details and so forth. So when we meet with people, whether it's TIF project or has nothing to do with TIF, when we meet with them on projects, it is always with the utmost confidentiality, which they absolutely require. Again, to get into hypotheticals today on these projects that haven't applied, and I don't know if they want the whole world to know what they're pursuing, I'd be happy to do that individually at any time. Be happy to.
Well, I think most of us on the council know what we're talking about here, about a recent project. And you can talk in very general terms about, why you're rejecting these projects, not revealing any secret information about these businesses.
There's one I can't talk in general terms about without disclosing what it is. There's another one I probably can, and what I would say, the very simple answer on one of them that I know some of you have had contact with is we've had multiple conversations with the county to establish the viability of a TIF district before you even get to the details of what would be requested and what would be reimbursed for. You're talking about there's no increment to be had from the project. There's a building that would be purchased by a private development team that today has an assessed value on the building, but is not paying property taxes in a traditional manner. Okay? When it's purchased and the renovation is done, there will be there will likely be no increment or minimal increment. You can't do a TIF district without increment. So you can have all kinds of great reasons in those buckets over to the right. You can't do a TIF district without increment.
Well, what we're talking about is definitely going to have an increment, but was rejected.
I just gave you an example of one of the projects. I'm not sure.
Councilor Jameson, please.
Darren, I suppose it's getting a little warm up here for you, and we'll give you a break here, I think, if we could. The couple wrap-up things, though. The committee that I'm talking about is in a reference to, and the purpose of, is the county commissions came to the state legislature to try to change the state law to provide themselves a place at the table.
Mm-hmm.
My committee provides a place for them at the table so that they become a part of the process and not just sent a letter and told what we've decided. I think there's a willingness to cooperate. Certainly we've already worked together with both counties to try to find solutions that all three of us can work together on. So that's part of the reason to have that committee. Transparency is the other. But again, I'll just share if we could, as a way to move this forward. Fiscal committee would certainly be welcome to have this come and review and work with Darren on the application process, vet the process of this TIF committee or something of that process further on. But I would like to maybe move this conversation over to fiscal if the rest of the council would so choose.
Councilor Rolfing.
While I like that idea somewhat, I've been in conversation with Darren and a number of developers in town, different things, trying to work through some options on this. This original ordinance that we're dealing with right now was an offshoot of the Land Use Committee. And I would prefer to see it continue there if we're going to do some more discussion along those lines, just because of the history, if no other reason, and because of the context that we've been going through and trying to work this
if I
thing
could,
out.
I will yield my request to the Land Use Committee.
And we'd be happy to take this on if that's what the council wants. Looking for some transparency, some additional ways to provide transparencies is what I'm hearing. Not only to us, but to the public as well. And so, we'd be happy to do that and take it on.
Yeah.
Councilor Kiley.
And just one last comment from me again, Darren. I guess I haven't through our discussions and Councilor Rolfing and I have met with you a number of times now prior to this, and through your presentation here today, I have never gotten the impression from you that you have told a developer that they cannot take out the application and have it move forward to the different committees, the Planning Commission as a committee as well as the City Council. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they have had that opportunity to do so. We're just trying to maybe come up with a process that's more encouraging so that we do get to this step, however.
Yeah.
And so Councilor Rolfing chairing the Land Use Committee can possibly pursue that into the future. But thank you. Again, we're not accusing you or your staff of doing anything wrong here. We're just trying to get additional information to improve the process.
Councilor Erickson.
One final question that I have is what happens if a project that you have the conversation and I don't know, and it's kind of, we're not sure. Your department's not sure. What if they come forward? What happens?
Well, I think
That may be recommended by.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, that's never happened, so we'd have to go through that. But we've given some thought to that, and we did when the ordinance was put in place as well, but more recently. And that is, I think we would still work with that development team, as best we could to learn what exactly they're asking for. And then as far as those TIF plans that would be built and the TIF district boundaries, I'm guessing the development team is going to be more comfortable having their own attorneys build those, and then our attorneys would review those rather than build them, make sure, that it's legal and all those types of things. And then we would form our recommendation, and the reasons why we wouldn't support it, for example, from there. That's real, and then we'd have to, there's presentations to the Planning Commission and the City Council, so I'm guessing we would give the presentation and the recommendation, and then they would be afforded the opportunity to come forward. Yeah.
All right.
And speak, not unlike, again, like a planning process where there's a denial recommended. I suppose it'd be very similar in some respects.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a couple for you, Darren, so
okay.
please don't leave.
All right.
Number one, I do want to clear up one fact here. Have you or your staff ever rejected a TIF application if they wanted to fill one out?
No.
Okay. Basically, what happens is the developer comes in, and we've had these discussions, and Brent and I have had numerous discussions on this also. But the developer comes in, they propose their plan, you have these discussions with them, and then you give them your recommendations on how you feel if the TIF meets some of the requirements or some of the, I thought that the council a few years ago was very adamant about what they wanted for TIF, and that your staff has utilized that as the borderline, the baseline.
Right.
And then at that point in time, the developer has the opportunity by placing a $2,500 deposit down to move the TIF application forward.
Yeah.
So this is set up similar to basically what planning has done too, except for, the deposit.
I think similar, and the only thing I would add to that is, honestly, I've probably done the process and Brent's work in particular a real disservice if I haven't said, please understand, we spent hours on these, and that's really going to be the challenge coming forward. I honestly don't know the level of detail we get into with financials and pro formas and determining a real need versus want and so forth. I don't know how you can make a responsible decision on some of these in a 20-minute presentation or a sales pitch over lunch. I don't, but.
And as I'll also say that I know that the council does have the opportunity to speak with developers, as we were talking about one sort of around that project, but that developer has contacted myself, and you've contacted me to meet about this also. And I know that you've also contacted other counselors. So, I do see that, yes, this process could probably use some tweaks, but I do believe that you and your staff have moved forward in the way that the council wanted you to. And then last on this, just a question on the TIF time. We talked about 20 years.
Yeah.
How is that time set?
Well, I'm guessing somewhere around that time, or at some point in the 1980s, is when the state provided the opportunity in codified law to allow cities and counties the ability to use tax increment financing as a tool. So I can only speak to the fact that I know the first TIF district approved in the City of Sioux Falls, I believe, was 1989. So I'm guessing the authority was given sometime around that time or just prior to it.
And just one last question. What's the breakdown on TIFs? What do we do, like commercial, residential? Is there percentages of how we utilize TIF?
No. Again, each one is really unique because the project's unique, the location is unique. They're all judged on their own merit, They just are. the challenges with the site, the challenges with the business model, the financials, the pro forma with whatever, if it's apartments, if it's Costco, if it's a hotel. I mean, they're all different, and they're all on different sites. Some are contaminated, some aren't.
Any other questions from the council? Darren, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I look forward to having this, continuing this
Yeah.
conversation in land use.
We do too.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next on the agenda will be Park and Recreation System Master Plan. I believe we'll have Kelby Morris and Pat O'Toole speaking on this.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council. Kelby Maris with Parks and Recreation. We're here today to roll out the draft recommendations for a Parks and Recreation System Master Plan for you. And just to give you a little bit of history of why we're here, the last System Master Plan for Parks and Recreation was adopted in 2005. And it's time for us to update the plan and create a new plan. And we have entered into contract with Greenplay, a national consulting firm, to help us with this master plan, and they have partnered with Stockwell Engineers to do that as well. This system master plan is a fundamental standard that we must meet as part of our CAPRA reaccreditation process. And that process is set to happen this summer. And with that, I will turn it over. Wanted to also mention that this is the draft recommendation. We're working on the final plan, and that we will be coming back to you in March to adopt this system master plan. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Pat O'Toole from Greenplay.
Thanks, Kelby, and I would appreciate the time that the City Council has given us to do this. Really what we're going to do today is we are to the draft portion. Want to reintroduce myself, Pat O'Toole, I'm a principal with Greenplay. We are Park and Recreation consultants, past Park and Recreation professionals across the board. So I've been consulting all across the country in different Park and Recreation cities, counties, since 1995. So as we looked here, I want to talk about what tonight we're going to go through, and then really we're going to concentrate on kind of the outcomes of the draft plan at this point. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process, some reoccurring themes throughout the process, key issues matrix, and the recommendations and action plans, and I believe you've got those in your packet. So the process, again, I'm going to try to expedite this a little bit because you've got it on your screen and not read to you and bore you to death. But this is the process that we've gone through. It's been about a 6-month process. The input was very high on community input, and then vetting that and looking at all different angles, looking at program services. We had Stockwell Engineering here, a local firm, which we have David Locke in the audience here, and I think, did John take off? Okay. And John Brown was here. But so they looked at the inventory, again, with a lot of local experience and the level of service, and came up with some maps that are included in the report. So again, we've just put the report together, which is the presentation we're doing here in blue. So we've got, again, March 17th, you'll have to put up with me again to come back. And in the meantime, we're going to tweak this plan into a final. But the plan, I believe, is about 188 pages long. So we do have an executive summary, 12 pages, that we'll concentrate on next time. That'll kind of pull some of the stuff out. But knowing that it has an awful lot of substance within it that you can look at as far as the entire plan. So through our process, these are kind of the reoccurring themes that we heard from every angle that we looked at. Your community really wants to see trails and connectivity out there to continue. Recreational water use, particularly on the Big Sioux and Skunk Creek. Marketing, as far as that's kind of a moving target. No matter how you do marketing, it's always never enough. You are one of the few cities that I will say has direct mail to every household. So even though these folks come in and say, I don't know what you do, they're still receiving it several times a year in the mail, and other options. But it is one you always want to improve as you go forward. Special event venues, that was another thing. People just love your community special events. Would like to see a site where there's adequate parking and vendors can come in, and it's kind of reserved for that. Parking, we heard that particularly on what we call Easter Sunday, so your special events and your tournaments and what have you, there's not enough parking. So as you see recommendations, it's kind of a look and see, is that a once a year deal or a 6 times a year or an every weekend kind of deal. And then year-round recreational opportunities. People would like to see, particularly in the wintertime, some indoor stuff, particularly when it's as cold as it is today. One of the things that is in your packet, and this is kind of a summary sheet of an awful lot of work and input over probably 5 or 6 months of time. I want to explain it a little bit just as the middle columns, where you see the red and the blue. At the top of that is really the quantitative and qualitative things that we heard or that we looked at. So we have looked at the last master plan. They did a needs assessment, a city satisfaction survey. So we've looked at city documents. As a consultant team, as we look at stuff, then we have an opinion. The community input, city data, as we went around and looked at facilities. The A, B, and C are how high of a priority it was to whatever input we had, particularly the community input. So the A's are the priorities that we heard from each of those amenities, and then the B's are the second ones. We kind of dropped the minor ones off that we heard maybe one time. And then we've prioritized them. If you look at the categories on the left, these are our key issues. And we have organizational issues, we have finance, we have programs and services, and then we have facilities and amenities. And the ones at the top of each of those categories are the ones we heard across the board and then down there. So that's really what culminated. This is a summary sheet that kind of gets us from input to now. These are our findings and into our recommendations. The right column is actually our preliminary recommendations that we flushed out and vetted with the staff last time I was in town. And then now we have put those into the report, as well as what we're calling a summary recommendation and action plan, which is what we're going to go through. Your other handout, mine's not colored as pretty as probably the one that you have, but it is entitled Recommendations with Actionable Planning, Cost Estimates, and Prioritization. It follows that key issue matrix, but we have extended that and put them into goals, objectives, actions, any budget impacts, and then they are prioritized in either a short-term, long-term, mid-term, or long-term. And again, it's information that we gathered from all the things on the right-hand side of this slide. Overall, the focus is to maintain and sustain and improve. I'm going to kind of preface this whole thing as Sioux Falls has probably one of the best park systems I've ever seen. I've been doing this for a lot of years. Big cities, small cities. And your city should be, and you should be commended for keeping things updated, maintained. Sometimes the toughest plans to write are the ones that you're doing a great job versus all these problems and how do we fix them. You have the components in place. You have the funding. So you have funded this. It has a priority to your community and obviously a priority to you guys. So that being said, we heard an awful lot of everything's well maintained. We liked these things. Your satisfaction survey was in the upper 90s across the board. So with that being said, people are saying, if I had to write this plan in one sentence, it would be keep doing what you're doing. And people told us that. Maintain what you have. And so consequently, when we get into this section, you're not going to see a whole lot of capital figures because the things weren't specific as to we want this in this park because of this. It was more look at new opportunities kind of things and present that against maybe what your standards of doing your half-mile radius around parks per rooftop. So again, just in reference, the short term is up to 3 years, midterms 4 to 6, and then this is a 10-year plan, so your long term is 7 to 10. Some of these you're going to see all three of those in there, and it's kind of a way to say this is ongoing. You look at it all the time, which is currently what you're doing. So again, based on all you guys can read, so I'm not going to read it to you, but I'm going to kind of hit, we have those 4 goals that are organizational, finance, programs, and facilities, and maybe I'll hit the objectives and you can read underneath that what that action is. Most of them, again, you're going to see to be determined on the capital cost, and then the short, mid, and long term on the right there. It does match up with what we heard. It does match up with what you're doing. In fact, we met this afternoon with the Park and Rec Board, and instead of a TIF in front of me, it was the 2016 CIP plan, and it was like I wrote it. So it matches up exactly with what the community said, with the priorities, and it just reinforced, it put a smile on my face to reinforce, keep doing what you're doing. So with that, organizational, maintain existing level of service quality to your citizens. That is that half-mile radius that you are almost completely covered in your city boundaries. So again, that map is in the plan. Enhance and improve internal and external communications regarding department activities. That's that marketing that we heard, again, even from folks that we know they're getting the brochures that claim they're not. I don't get on the website and do this or that. So we hear this in every city. It's kind of like if I'm not thinking about it at that time and it's not right in front of me, I don't go look for it. Therefore, when somebody asks me the question in a focus group, I go, I don't get enough information. I don't know what's going on. So, again, the marketing plan's been updated, will be adopted next month, so you're on track there. Maybe you look at that every 5 years. And the one thing we did hear from folks is maybe starting to expand out into the surrounding communities a little bit and get them to come in and help support your system. They're using it as well, but they're not receiving a brochure and that kind of stuff. So reach out a little bit. Provide improved signage agency-wide and make it easier for patrons to find and use facilities. Again, people are saying, we want some more signage off the roadways, within parks, particularly on trails. We want to know where they're going, how they link up, how far. I used to use the example is when my kids were small, I had a boy and a girl, I would never walk out with them riding a bike on a trail any further than I could carry 2 bikes and 2 kids home. And that's what people are talking about. Where does it go? How far if I run? So that type of signage they're looking for. Maintain existing facilities and amenities. That's exactly what you've been doing, and that's exactly what your community told us to do as a priority. So you've got the CIP plan, which I saw today, a maintenance program. You got everything in place that it takes to do that. So therefore, when we see the short, mid, and long term, those are going to be that annual review of all those things and what to put in place. And then, of course, that's when you'll price it out for that to be determined. Increase social media use and navigation apps for parks and trails. Again, everybody's going smartphone. People looking at, you could put those mile markers on a smartphone navigation app. We're seeing those so familiar where people are taking pictures of the URL and it gives them information on, it could be a park map is what we're seeing is happening. So again, people brought that up. Increase appropriate partnerships within the community. You've got that established. And again, the messages continue to do that, build on existing ones. We did have maybe a suggestion that make sure all of them are in writing and are up to date rather than handshake deals that sometimes we find. And it also appears that you're in pretty good shape there. Goal 2, the financial opportunities. Increase special event and activity sponsorships. So again, you're doing that. Just keep doing what you're doing. Consider a development impact fee ordinance. This is one that came up in several of the groups. It was kind of a, should we formalize what we're doing now? It seems to be working. People are developers, it sounds like, are willing to do all this, but there's no program. There's no process or a dedication fee ordinance. So in this case, we're saying explore that. If it's working well the other way, great. Sometimes you find if you don't have one, at certain points you're going to maybe hit a roadblock that says, I don't want to do that. And it might be in a crucial place where you really need some parkland. Pursue grant and philanthropic opportunities. Again, use your foundation. And one of the things here that was brought up, grant dollars are a way that people always like to fund. It is, with you being accredited, that is a big plus on the chart of asking for grants. There's still quite a bit of state and federal money that people just don't even request every year. And some of these foundations have to give a certain amount of money away. What we do find across the board almost everywhere we go is there's not enough staff time to do that, because it does take dedication to research, to write, and it's not finished once you write the grant. You have to track it and you have to report back. So what we have found as a very economic way of doing it is finding somebody in the community that loves to do this kind of stuff, that might be retired, and they can do it on a contract and even get paid for a percentage of their successful money bringing in. So that's one way we've seen that being successful. Consider implementing a cost recovery and pricing policy. We just heard a little bit of maybe some consistency across the board as far as cost recovery. Certainly wasn't a big issue, and again, it was kind of a continue what you're doing, the periodic check on fees for programs, making sure you're in the market area for what you're charging, and then continue the scholarship program was brought up as well. Goal 3, programs and service delivery. Explore the ability to increase recreational activities on the Big Sioux River. We did hear quite a bit of that, where people would really like to kayak, fish, those types of things. Explore increasing year-round activities. Was that indoor, year-round? And we also heard a lot about the indoor aquatic center coming in, that's going to be huge for this type of a goal. Explore offering more programs at convenient times for citizens. We heard some folks that would like some more programming during the working person's hours, some evenings and weekends, rather than at the time that they have to work. Explore increasing number of program opportunities. We heard from seniors, special needs, teens, and tweens. And again, it was kind of a continue to monitor that, because what we also know is those same folks that don't know what's going on because they don't read or get online, don't think there's enough programs for them at the times that they need it. So we did a program analysis as part of it. That's one of our chapters in the report. And from our opinion, looking at population, number of facilities, number of programs, I mean, you guys are doing a tremendous job. So there was not a gap that we saw, but again, you monitor that as people get older, as we know baby boomers retire every day. So just to keep an eye on that, and it is a question that we asked. And teen programs they're a moving target everywhere. Excuse me. As soon as it doesn't become cool, then nobody does it. So you just got to kind of stay on top of it. And then goal 4, improving facilities and amenities. First one out of the gate, maintain and improve existing facilities. It's that same thing we heard over and over again. You have the plans in place to do that. Got a tickle in my throat here. Expand trails and connectivity was probably, I'm going to say, one of the highest things on the list, right behind take care of what you got. And heard that loud and clear. So you've got a bicycle master plan. Again, today, even with the Park and Rec Board, that's on the list, and it's going to be ongoing. Improve water access for recreational uses, again on the Big Sioux River and the Skunk Creek. Add community centers with new elementary schools. Again, that was on the list today. There's facilities by name that are matching up with this, but again, there's kind of a current 3-mile radius around certain elementary schools. So which ones are in areas that you might need to add them to? So again, supports the current CIP plan that you're looking at. Develop new amenities at new and existing parks. We did hear, this was the only specific thing we heard, was people want tennis courts in the northeast and southwest portion, and look for opportunities to add parks and trails in the new growth areas east and south of I-229. Add a special event venue, again for community events. So they're looking for a really large, connection even to the river, to downtown of a special event venue. Improving parking at the parks and popular venues. Again, it's kind of an explore and see where there might be true parking issues, or is it the one time a year that you got a big event somewhere and people have to park on the grass or in the neighborhoods. Continue to improve ADA accessibility to all facilities. Doing a great job with the current ADA transition plan, which is another thing that needs to be in place for a CAPRA accreditation. And then we're recommending that you update the current ADA plan that was last done in 2002. The ADA federal laws changed in 2014, for actually the first time in 20 years. So to update that plan, and my understanding is that is like the marketing plan that's being looked at as we speak, and should be ready in the next few months. So we were again right on target with that, including short term. Upgrade convenience and customer service amenities. This is where we ask people, how could you improve some areas, maybe add some new pizzazz to some of your existing stuff. And as we hear in all the other places in the country, shade, storage, public art, security lighting, potentially some artificial turf on some of your tournament fields. So it's really, again, look and see where some of these things might be added. We do know that people stay places where it's comfortable, where they have drinking fountains or shade and those types of things. Add destination park amenities. What we heard was it would be great to have a destination playground and some natural play areas based on some of your natural features in the city with climbing features. So again, a destination playground is one that it's got some large capacity for kids and families, and usually big enough that people can drive in, spend a morning. Buses come in from elementary schools or the daycare places, and it's large enough to do that. With that, I'll try to answer any questions you have or comments. We'd love to hear what you think.
Pat, did you have any requests from input for zip lines?
I don't think we heard that one.
Nobody?
I do think that we did hear potentially an adventure park. So that was probably covered in adventure park, where we heard, and again, we've got verbatim of everything that was said that'll be in this appendix. So we'll look at that. But I think there was a potential adventure park as one of those new park amenities in a growth area that might have what we call like an all-wheel park, not just a skateboard park, but could have bikes, zip lines. So that adventure, and it's certainly in the trends package because we're seeing some of those.
Oh, so it is a trend across the country. We wouldn't be the first. Sorry. All right.
It is a trend, and I would say it would fall under the category of looking at stuff new, but I would have to say we didn't hear it. It didn't make the A or B category. Wasn't supported that much. Sorry.
We'll strike that from the record, but thanks, Pat. Actually, so just a couple questions, maybe. I want to make sure I get this right. So we need to go through this process to make sure we stay accredited, right? And that's an important part for our system.
Yes, you need a current master plan. The standards say within 5 to 7 years.
Okay, and it seems pretty thorough, and your process seems pretty straightforward, but could you tell us what you're getting paid to do this?
I'd have to look. You remember, Kelby? 49? 69,000.
And one last question for Kelby, if you could just, and then I'll be done. Kelby, the park board saw presented, went through their 2016 CIP budget. Now I know that the park board makes their recommendation to the mayor, and it's from there that it gets to us. I even hate to step into this fray, but that recommendation from the park board at this point is perfect. I mean, it has no politics involved. It's from their heart. It's from everything that they think is important. I would sure appreciate a copy of that if I could.
Sure. Yeah, what the park board discussed today was their top 5 priorities and their overreaching priorities throughout the whole park system about things that they would like to see included in the plan. So,
perfect. Thank you.
Councilor Staggers?
Yes, I was kind of surprised when you said that basically we're doing okay and we don't have a whole lot to change. So I guess I'm wondering here, why don't we have some maybe new innovative ideas being presented? What I mean, for example, is that we shouldn't necessarily be treating all the parks equal at all. There are some parks that are used a lot and should be focused on. Then there are other parks that are not, and we should not really focus a lot of attention on those. Is there any way we could maybe be trying to reorient ourselves towards, really focusing on the parks that are used? And some, I don't hardly see anybody in the parks at all.
Well, I think if we go back, one area that is in there that we heard a lot of is people would like to see the high traffic trails widened because there is such big usage at certain areas of certain parks. So we've identified that, but I think the overall, what we heard from folks is we could come in here and give you all kinds of really cool stuff that works on the West Coast that your Midwesterners are, I'm a Midwesterner, but they're focused on making what we have better. Doesn't mean it has to stay the same. How do we improve it? In fact, some of the discussion today at the park board level was some of our older parks, the demographics have changed around them. How do we change with that? So I think what this master plan, when I say keep doing what you're doing, is you guys are doing that. You're re-looking at stuff. What we do, and we've got an appendix of I don't know how many pages of trends from around the country that are working well somewhere that might fit in here. And we do have the adventure park in there, but what the connection that we heard that people would like to see that they don't have to the level they want is the connection to the water, the connection on the trails, and those are high use areas by an awful big demographic. It doesn't fit just families or families with kids. I mean, you'll see all types of folks out on your trails, which is pretty common. So I think what we're trying to do is say, here's kind of a whole list of stuff you could look at and see where you might put it in your system. But what we're trying to do is say, this is grassroots, what did your citizens say they would support? Is kind of where our recommendations have come from.
You mentioned, excuse me, our citizens. How many people are we talking about giving input here?
I want to say we did focus groups to, help me out, Kelby, 150? That sound right? People? It was in that neighborhood, and then we had a public forum as well. And the other thing that we've said almost everywhere we go, is that people don't come out of the woodwork when they're satisfied. If they have a bone to pick, you're going to hear from them. I've always threatened to just put tax in the title of what we're doing, and they'll come and then say, we're just kidding. Now that you're here, we want to find out what you want. But, you know, from the plans we do across the country, you were very well represented in a wide variety of types of folks in there.
And finally, these 150 people we talked with, did we ever bring up the cost or anything involved in doing this?
We did through discussion, when something would come up and somebody would say, so it was relative. Is it high, medium, low? Is it a self-directed activity? Is it one that you can add some programs on top of it? Is it indoor? So again, we had some discussion even on the indoor aquatic center and what we see there as far as program levels. The other thing I'll say is you've got a very well-educated community on what they want to pay for things and what should be paid for and what not. What they want to have is free or very affordable. So they've got a good handle on what you're doing.
Okay, if I can just say one more thing. And yeah, I guess I'm surprised about this cost issue. Because to me, it seems like when you talk about parks, everybody's in favor of more trails. Everybody's more in favor of more parks. But really the cost component is rarely discussed, and it doesn't seem like numbers were really presented here.
Well, some of them are not because I don't have a gauge of what needs to happen with CIP and that. What I liked was the priorities lined up, but to what level? We do have a per mile cost in there for trails, so people can see exactly what it does cost per tennis court. So when we've had a specific item, it's costed out. When it's look at your CIP program and see where you can enhance some things, we don't know what those are. What we do tend to find is if you make these plans flexible, then just like today, what gets pushed to the next year or what comes up as a priority because it broke in the pool systems, when you have a pump go out, it's a major expense that might set something else back. So we used to put plans together that said year 1 you do this, year 2 you do this, and they sat on a shelf because we couldn't get 2 done, so that meant 3 through 100 are out of the picture. This gives you some levity to say, this is really important now. We want to put our money here. So it vets it locally instead of this plan. So we want this to be, what you're seeing here, we want this dog-eared, over 10 years. And moved around and shifted and added to. And likewise with the level of service maps, they're in GIS, so you can, as you add things, it's going to add to your level of service instead of the old way where you get a static map and this is the way it was in 2015. So,
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I sat on one of the focus groups with Pat, his staff, and the rec department, and it was very informative for me, being city councilor / mom / small business owner, to be a part in what's important in the circle of friends that I'm with. And coming back to the money thing, what we talked about was, piggybacking off of what you said, was these are the suggestions, the high, medium, low, what can we do, and then take that back to the park department and the park board, and let's vet them further there, find out how much money we do have in this pot in their department to see what we can get done and stretch our dollars the furthest. I thought it was very informative. I thought it was great to be able to offer my perspective for the generation of people that I, again, circle myself with, and just hearing what's important to other people, what they want to hear as well. And so there was Post-it notes around the whole entire room. It was probably an hour that we met, but I appreciated being involved in the conversation and just know that the process was truly working, and that this plan is a good roadmap for the rec department and the Parks Board as we move forward as a council.
Thank you. I will also say one of those questions in the focus group was, how do we fund this? In fact, we levitate to say these are all great ideas, but now how are we going to fund it? And again, the attitude was, we'll find a way. If it's a 10-year plan, this is important to people. So what has kind of come up is that history. You got to a certain point with very high standards, with very high quality, and people love you. That's all supported because it takes money to do all those things. Even the programs you don't charge anybody for, trails, they cost money. So we did vet that. We asked the question, for all this stuff, would you pass it, would you up your taxes? Would you do a bond referendum? Not that they're the same people who are going to go to the polls, but it gives us a pulse and gives you a pulse to say, people, they like your parks. They'll support your parks. And they, in my opinion, would support more the building of them than paying fees to come into programs, because we'll find that money too. So.
Any other questions from the council? Statements? I'd like to just make one. I'd like to thank you for coming in and working with our Parks Department and meeting with our citizens and discussing over parks. I feel that our parks are, as you stated, one of the jewels of our city, and to have a council member who is a former park board member, and to see that person's efforts and the caring that they have for the parks that we have in the city, and our staff, our last two directors that I've worked with directly. I want to thank both of you also and your staff. You guys, I feel you've done a great job, and I think that every time we do a citizen survey, I think that proves it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I agree with all that. And I'll be back St. Patty's Day.
Okay, thank you.
To get the final, let's go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, with that being the end of the presentations, we will adjourn this meeting of the informational meeting, City Council. We will start up the Land Use Committee meeting in about 10 minutes. Thank you.